Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hope you're having an amazing day. As many of you know, the RX 7000 series of graphics cards will debut with the 7900 XT and XTX's launch in around a week's time. And with the prices of these cards, I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of hype, a lot of excitement surrounding the launch. But there are a lot of questions at the moment concerning availability, i.e. how many cards will be available at launch, will they be rare, and also of course performance. Since we are so close to launch though, we are now in leak zone, and there are a couple of intriguing pieces of information that have surfaced online, and we're going to discuss some of that along with some other non-RX 7000 topics in this very video. So I'm going to begin with a quick leak concerning the performance information of the RX 7900 XT and XTX. This is not super surprising because it falls right in line with what AMD themselves have essentially kind of announced with their benchmarks, although this is on average. So the 7900 XT is a little slower than the 4080. The reverse is true for the 7900 XTX, a little faster than the 4080. Meanwhile, the 7900 XTX is considerably slower than the 4090. This is according to Twitter account All the Watts. I will also add, excuse me, I can't speak suddenly, that this also falls in line with what I mentioned in a video yesterday. One of my sources, who's typically fairly accurate, they said that from what they've been hearing through the grapevine, it seems that reviewers are finding around a 10% improvement over the 4080 for the 7900 XTX. That's an average of raster performance, and I believe it was benchmarked at 4K. However, I think that is the reference card. So obviously, if you're like screwing around with power limits or whatever, then your mileage will certainly vary, and it is not necessarily how things will shape up in, let's say, 3 months' time when drivers are updated or what have you. Who knows how that's going to end up being. Meanwhile, the RTX 3080 Ti is roughly the same level of ray tracing performance as the XT, and the XTX is more like the 3090/90 Ti. So honestly, the ray tracing performance of the RX 7000 series is not that great. Now I know that that's a very controversial topic. Some people absolutely love ray tracing. They think it's the best thing sliced bread, you know, and to be honest with you guys, like some games, especially early on, the ray tracing implementation kind of sucked. And it wasn't particularly optimized. There were a lot of visual bugs, and the same thing could be said for DLSS. Like the first implementation of DLSS, there were a couple of games it looked okay in. I think it was Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I don't remember. But there were a couple of games it looked okay-ish in, and others it's like, ugh, what is going on with those blurring? But now a lot of titles look really good with ray tracing. I know Control is a really obvious game, but in my personal opinion, I think Spider-Man, for example, looks pretty phenomenal with ray tracing. Some implementation of some ray tracing, like Doom Eternal, are more subtle in their performance hit as well, but they still make a pretty nice visual difference, at least in my personal opinion. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects the sales of the card, or whether it does at all. I suspect, and this is not a leak, this is my guess, RDNA 4 is going to have significantly better ray tracing performance. Whether it's going to be as good as Nvidia, because you would expect anyway Nvidia to make another sizable gain forward with ray tracing, but it's going to be very interesting to see how all of that shapes up. Remember, one of the reasons that RT performance takes a hit with AMD GPUs is because the way that they have constructed the GPU itself isn't just for desktop. It's also, of course, for mobile and other such things, but it's also for things like, for example, consoles. And that means that you need to reuse and utilize as much silicon as possible. And, you know, I'm probably going to go into this in a lot deeper topic in another video, because I don't want this video to be like a 15-minute discussion on die sizes and silicon and, you know, that kind of thing, because I want this to be a quickie. But yeah, like, this is one of the things that Nvidia have, you know, going for them, but also kicking them in the ballsack. Because, for example, if you look at the, you know, die of the RTX 4090 or even the 30 series cards, if you look at the sheer amount of space which is eaten up with the tensor cores and the RT cores, yada yada yada, it's, well, the technical term is a lot. And obviously, AMD, one of the things they did with, you know, RDNA 3 is they shifted the Infinity Cache off chip off of the GCD, and they threw it onto the MCDs. And with NVIDIA, of course, they've got just an absolute crap ton of L2 cache on the 4090. I think it's like 72 megabytes out of 80, which is enabled. So there's a lot of, how do I say this? There's a lot of options available for NVIDIA, and I suspect that they will have to go MCM on the RTX 50 or 60 series at some point, because there's limits on how big you can make a die. Not just in terms of cost, but everything else. But anyway, again, I'm getting a little bit off topic. What I will mention is that there are also some benchmarks on Geekbench. I want to give quick credit here to Bench Leaks on Twitter, as well as videocards.com, where I initially found these. I'm not going to spend too long on this because, well, there's not a huge amount to say, but long story short, the RTX 4080 in Vulkan is slightly outperformed by the 7900 XTX, but in non-Vulkan, so that would be OpenCL, the 7900 XTX gets put over the knee and spanked rather vigorously. So there is a sizable difference there, and we all know about the software stack and that type of thing. So it's an interesting one on how all of this is going to end up. Speaking of ending up and costing, there is an interesting set of threads that has been, an interesting topic that has been doing the rounds on Twitter since, well, early morning UK time, whatever that is for you guys. And it basically is something that initially, I think, started on Chip Hell. I've spotted this from Harikaze5719. I follow them on Twitter, and they generally do a pretty good job at reporting things. And there's also a Google Translate of this as well. Again, I'll link to this in the video description. Long story short, some individual is stating that the reference cards for N31, and specifically here the 7900 XTX, are being sold at a loss. And I've got to tell you guys, normally I err on the side of I don't know, because I wasn't told this, or I can't verify this. I haven't verified this with my sources, at least this specific thing, but I was told that the cards are pretty cheap to produce. I wasn't told the exact bill of material, but I gotta tell you guys, I think this is very unlikely to be true. Now, what I can say is that I was initially told that the $999 price of the 7900 XTX was not initially the price they were going to go for. I've had a little bit of conflicting info, whether it's $10.99 or $11.99, but either way, AMD quite late in the game decided to cut the price. And I think this is one of the reasons perhaps there's not that much of a price disparity between the XT and the XTX. Whether that's true or not, I honestly do not know. Obviously, at the end of the day, I do not have bugs in Lisa Su's office, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's true. However, Tech Nerd on Twitter actually did a quite nice breakdown, basically guesstimating the costs. And basically, roughly speaking, it's $105 per GCD. And then obviously you've got the 37mm MCDs, there are 6 of those, and then obviously you've got GDDR6, the PCB, the VRM, all the other crap that goes into making a GPU, and I don't just mean, the actual silicon and raw components, but there's things like shipping, and so on and so on. And remember, it's not just the actual cost of the card, but hypothetically speaking, let's say that you sell a card. Let's just hypothetically say that you sold the card at like $100. Let's just say that the card cost you $50 and you sell it at $100, right? Obviously that's not realistic, but let's hypothetically say that's what you did. Well, there are still things that you need to take into consideration, like profit, and you still need to have additional cash to, research additional architectures and pay employees. And of course, the cost also needs to be for future support, like new drivers, new features, blah, blah, blah. And Kepler L2 on Twitter also estimates that the bill of materials is probably around the $500 region. Personally speaking, I think that's probably about right. I have not done the math on this. I'm not speaking from pure confidence, but I'm pretty certain that AMD are not losing cash per card sold. That's kind of where I'm at with that. I think it's very unlikely. And now we're going to discuss Intel. This is kind of a different video, well, different segment to a video actually for Intel. I'm going to say something that perhaps has not been said about Intel in a good long time. They are actually ahead of schedule on something. I'm going to give you guys a moment just to recover from the sheer shock. You know, if I've given you some, you know, trauma, or perhaps, you know, made you gasp in sheer I don't even know the word, like seriously, I don't think this has been said for Intel in so long. But anyway, being serious for a moment, Intel are ahead of schedule, and this is for their 20 angstrom process. So risk production is hitting by the first half of 2024, and 18 is going to be also ready in 2024. You can also see the roadmap. Some of the stuff has already been leaked on the line. I think it was Video Cards who leaked some of this. I could be wrong. I don't want to misattribute credit, so if I'm wrong, I apologize, but I can't... yeah, I haven't dug through that, sorry. But basically speaking, you can see that there are a ton of different products which Intel will be releasing over the next several quarters. And basically speaking, we're going to be seeing a plethora of devices across desktop, across server, across mobile. It's going to be very interesting to see how Intel competes in the longer run. Obviously, Epic at the moment is really not doing them any favors in the data center. I think Intel are starting to claw back. I think the 13900K is actually a really good processor. I've actually been doing some testing of it myself. I was sent one a little late to the party, I know, but just because I've been moving and stuff, it's not been, well, let's just say smooth sailing. However, I will say that the 13900K is really fast. Like, it's really damn good. And, you know, it's going to be probably beaten rather soundly in a lot of applications with the V caches. It's going to be interesting to see what the prices are like on the V caches, though, from AMD. But I'm obviously, at the end of the day, whether you prefer AMD, Intel, or whomever, to my mind, the reality is that it's best to have as much competition as possible, because obviously competition is what spurs on lower pricing, more, you know, better products. And for example, when we saw AMD release the FX series of CPUs back in the day, you know, and we saw like Bulldozer and all of that stuff, I think it's fair to say that if AMD had been more competitive at that point, we may have seen some better, or should I say more improved processors. Like, it would have been very interesting, for example. Obviously this is not what happened, and they would have had to really have kind of, you know, planned this much earlier, but it would have been interesting if it was like the 7700K that had 6 cores and they kind of ramped up their production schedule. Obviously Intel, when the Ryzen, when Zen 1 launched, they were really kind of, and Zen 2 and so on, they really were, you know, on their back heels a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this shapes up. With that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you have, well, you know what to do, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves, guys. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.